When I was asked to be Chancellor by Liz Truss, this is going to be tough. It's like suddenly being told you've got to run a marathon. You know, it's like, it's going to be tough.
Jeremy Hunt is one of the UK's top politicians.
Parliament won't allow us, the Daily Mail won't like it. I don't know what it is. We need to be bolder.
He's held some of the biggest jobs. He was the longest serving Health Secretary. He was also Foreign Secretary and, of course, Chancellor.
It was a 72 billion black hole when I became Chancellor. By the way, Rachel Reeves, real 72 billion black hole, not a fictitious 22 billion black hole.
We were left a £22 billion black hole.
Even coming close to becoming Prime Minister at one point.
No, I asked you if you'd resigned, Boris.
What I had with my opponent is somebody...
There aren't many people more qualified to talk about the UK's place in the world.
Donald Trump is a phenomenal person, not to be underestimated.
Do you think we should have some kind of replica of Doge?
Absolutely. China, since Xi Jinping became president, has taken away freedoms from people. I remember Netanyahu once said to me that
now he's out of government, has had time to reflect, he can tell us what he really thinks.
Do you think we're signing too many people off on mental health sickness?
yes, I do. My most famous gaffe was when I called my Chinese wife Japanese. This like became a big thing.
My wife is Japanese. My wife is Chinese, sorry.
There was an article on the BBC website. This is as insulting to Chinese people as it would be to call an Israeli a Nazi.
Make sure you subscribe so we can continue to get bigger and bigger guests.
Jeremy, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. Looking over your career history, I was fascinated that you went for entrepreneurship as a career choice early on. What kind of inspired that, and what did your family and friends make of it at the time?
Well, it is true that I left Oxford in 1988 and I was the only one of my contemporaries that I knew of who actually went to set up their own business. And I suppose there was a sort of good reason and a bad reason. The good reason was that Margaret Thatcher was in her heyday then. She was at the height of her powers. And she basically, in the circles I was moving in, made it quite fashionable to be an entrepreneur. She said, these are the risk takers, the people we should admire and respect. And I was quite an ardent supporter of hers. And so that had some influence. But I think also the other side was that my dad had got through his whole life on a naval salary and really struggled from time to time. And I thought, I just don't want to have to struggle like I could see he struggled over money. So I thought if I can, do something successful, make a bit of money when I'm young, then I won't have those worries. So it's probably a combination of those two.
And do you think the culture of enterprise has kind of changed since then? Do you think it's become more acceptable to become an entrepreneur?
I do. And I think that is a really positive change. And I think we can see it in the UK, particularly with the tech sector, where, we are going great guns, the third largest tech ecosystem in the world after the United States and China. And technology has also made having your own business a lot easier. You can work from home, you can do Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, and it's generally facilitated setting up your own business. So I think it's probably different to how it was in my day. It's probably an easier thing and a slightly more normal thing, and that's a good thing.
How did you decide to do hot courses? Because there were a few businesses, weren't there? There was a Marmalade exporting company at one point, if I'm right in saying. What was the sort of process that you went through?
Well, I lived in Japan for 2 years. I did that quite soon after graduating because I wanted to learn Japanese. I came back to the UK, I guess I was 24, and I set up the business with my best friend, and we just did things that took our fancy. So the first thing was I noticed in Japan there was no Frank Cooper's Oxford Marmalade. So I tracked down the manufacturers who actually turned out to be in Birmingham rather than in Oxford, but that was a bit of an eye-opener. But anyway, I tracked them down. I said, can I be your agent in Japan? And they said, sure. And so I flogged up and down Japan, but it turned out that the marmalade boom in Japan had passed. In fact, I think if I'm honest, it probably never was. And then we started seeing if we could do children's playgrounds of all things, because we thought we spotted a niche there. That was a failure. We wondered about importing Belgian chocolates because you've got lots of amazing samples when you do a business like that. That didn't work out. And then finally we had this idea, which was that we would do a map of London, again linked to Japan, a map of London in Japanese that we would hand out to everyone who arrived from Japan at Heathrow on a direct flight from Tokyo. And we had teams of people who would hand out these maps. And we sold advertising to people like Harrods and Selfridges on the map. And that was actually doing really well because we had a captive market until Heathrow decided that they wanted to charge us market rates. And then we had to stop it. And the result was that we moved into publishing guides for students in London, initially Japanese, but then we did other countries, and then we did English, and that was how we ended up with being a publishing guide. So it was a really iterative process. And my real reflection on that was that I really encourage people to set up a business in your 20s because, no kids, no mortgage, a sense of fun. We just had such a good time, and it really didn't matter when we failed. We just pick ourselves up and start again. I think when you start a business, when you've got kids, family, a mortgage, the whole thing becomes a slightly more serious endeavour, and you really don't want to fail. And so we had such a lot of fun looking back on it, but it was partly because we were footloose and fancy free.
What do you think, if you knew everything that you knew now, you'd be doing if you were in your 20s in 2025?
I would definitely want to start up my own business.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got
But in what? What do you think?
So I think, I've always been totally fascinated by the technology sector. My hot courses started off as a directory publisher, directories of courses and universities. But this was the 1990s, and we could see Google coming. In fact, in those days, it was, Alta Vista and a whole bunch of other search engines. We didn't know that Google was going to emerge as the winner. But so we moved online very quickly. So I've always been interested in tech, but I would say that most importantly, when you start a business, the most important thing is to start a business where you can see it's a growth market. Because if it's a market that's growing, it'll be very forgiving when you make mistakes, as you always do. If it's a really tough market where there's a lot of competition and it's not really growing, then it's a lot harder. Would I want to set up a PR business in London? No. London is just full of PR businesses run by very smart people. And, I think your chance of something that really takes off is relatively small. But, you look at, something like artificial intelligence or gaming, and, you can see there's incredible growth happening in some of those industries, protecting children from abuse on the internet. I think those areas are areas that are really growing.
And let's talk about one of the sort of like most high-profile jobs you did. I was laughing there about sort of thinking in my head, Heathrow was sort of clamping down on your business, thinking, I wonder if the head of public affairs at Heathrow knew they were clamping down on a future Chancellor, a business model. But what did you see the job of Chancellor as?
Well, remember this was the fourth job I'd held in the cabinet. And so I had quite a lot of experience. And one thing about politics, which is a little bit unusual, is that you can't really go into politics as a specialist. I mean, of course, there are people who become an MP and think, I'd love to be Chancellor. But the way it actually works when you get here is that if you're lucky enough to get a job in the cabinet, you take whatever you're given. And you're never really in a position to say, I'd like to do this job and not that job, because it's really where the vacancy is. So because it was the fourth time I've been in the cabinet, I had a lot of experience. And what I would say is that the most important thing is you need to know and be really clear what is the big thing you want to change. And my way of looking at political jobs was there's a lot of short-term crap, if you'll forgive the word, stuff being thrown at you in the newspapers, in Parliament every day, constant barrage of criticism. And I always said to myself, imagine 5 years on, when I'm not doing this job, what is the single thing or the group of things I want to look back on and say, I did that, and I'm really proud I did it. So when I arrived as Chancellor, I had a few things in my mind as things that really needed to happen. I mean, a very obvious one was that, we had 11% inflation. We were entering into a recession. So I wanted to stabilize the economy, get it through a soft landing, get us through to the other side. That was an obvious one. Perhaps a less obvious one was that I arrived thinking we needed to increase defense spending because I was very worried about the Ukraine war. My dad was in the Navy, so maybe I'd had a lifetime thinking about that sort of thing. So it was a very big objective. But because I had a black hole, it was a 72 billion black hole when I became Chancellor. By the way, Rachel Reeves, real 72 billion black hole, not a fictitious 22 billion black hole. But because I had that black hole, there was literally no money to give a big increase in funding to defence. So it took me a year and a half before I found out a way to do it. But that was also on my list. So that, I think, knowing, and by the way, when I was running my business, I took the same approach. I said, look, there's going to be the day-to-day stuff you do, like hiring a sales director or, launching a product in this market or, having a great Christmas party for your team. But those are the kind of things you're going to do anyway. What's the big thing you're trying to achieve in the next couple of years that's going to transform your business? And does everyone know that's what you want to do?
Yeah.
And is everyone working hard to make that happen? And I think it's a good way of running a business.
And how did you view the UK jobs market when you were Chancellor? Like, you have all this data that's kind of coming at you in terms of all the things as well. Like, it seems to be going through like a pretty extraordinary change, like off the back of the pandemic and so on. Like, one of the key things now is that we've got almost 1 million people that aren't in work that were prior to the pandemic. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, the first thing is that I think there are a lot of fantastic opportunities in the UK, genuinely, really do. I mean, we've got not just Europe's largest technology sector, but Europe's largest life science sector, Europe's largest film and TV sector, the second or third largest renewables sector in Europe. There's lots of really interesting jobs here. But we've got some things that we need to do better. And one of them is that too many people are being signed off having to look for work after the pandemic. That's something we definitely need to sort out. Secondly, post-Brexit, without getting into all the Brexit debates, we're not in the single market. So we've got to have a plan as to how employers are going to fill the 800,000 vacancies that we have in the economy at the moment. And it's not going to be from, peachy keen Hungarians or Poles or Czechs as it used to be. And that was really why I did my childcare reforms as Chancellor, because I realised that if we had the same number of women in work as they have in Denmark, where there's 81% female participation rate, we would have 1 million more women in work in the UK. So you could fill every single one of those vacancies if you made it easier for people to work. So I do think it's a very important part of our economic success if we remove the barriers that are stopping people working.
How do you come up with a policy like the childcare reforms? Because it was pretty sort of innovative way of doing it. Like, it wasn't something that was necessarily being talked about. Like, how did you come up with it?
Well, I decided, the moment that I finished the autumn statement of 22, we started planning the spring budget. Didn't have very long. But I thought, we've got to deal with labour supply. This is like a big post-Brexit elephant in the room. And so I got teams in the Treasury working on everything. So we looked at, for example, the pension tax rule that was making doctors retire in their 50s. We looked at childcare, we looked at unemployment benefit, we looked at disability benefits. And having scoured the waterfront, the most exciting one was childcare. But we had a big problem, which is that it cost £4 billion a year. And we didn't have £4 billion. And so I asked the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, to do something they'd never done before, which is to take the policies in a budget and model the impact on GDP after 5 years, which is the end of the fiscal period. Now, bear in mind that until I became Chancellor, the fiscal period was 3 years. So I extended it to 5 years in the autumn statement. So you had a bit longer for policies to work.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the impact of getting, I think was probably about 100,000 more parents into work as a result of these policies, was it brought the cost down from £4 billion a year to £600 million a year, which is a massive difference. And because they concluded that, we realised we could afford it. So it was really by the skin of our teeth, but we got there.
How do you get more sort of long-term strategic decision-making in politics? Like, you talked about it a couple of times there in terms of reflecting on your business career of how you did it. How do you bring more of it into politics?
Are you a fan of Jimmy's Jobs of the Future? Hi, I'm Sonny, one of the producers behind the show. Have you ever thought, my business deserves to be in the spotlight too? Well, you're not alone. Companies reach out to us all the time, asking us to create podcasts and digital video content for them. But until now, we've only taken on a limited amount of projects. But here's the good news. In 2025, we're expanding. Our production company, Boxlight, is now ready to help more businesses like yours tell their stories with high-quality, white-label content. Curious to see what we can do or how much it might cost? Head over to boxlight.io. You'll find examples of our work and even a podcast calculator to explore your options. That's boxlight.io. We'd love to help you shine in 2025. Now, back to Jimmy.
How do you get more sort of long-term strategic decision-making in politics? Like, you talked about it a couple of times there in terms of reflecting on your business career of how you did it. How do you bring more of it into politics?
Well, a lot of it depends on the motivations and personality of politicians. So, some politicians live for the next day's headlines.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be wanting to focus largely on things they can announce, make a bit of noise with. But others really care about what they're going to be able to look back on and be happy that they changed. And it is really important that we have politicians who want to change things for the better. And I'll say something that might be a bit counterintuitive to some of your listeners, but Donald Trump evokes very mixed emotions. Lots of people profoundly disagree with him. Others are diehard supporters. And I've got plenty of things I disagree with him on. For example, his views on climate change or Ukraine. But one thing he is doing is changing the rules about how much a democratic government can actually change in office. With what Elon Musk is doing with Doge, with the radicalism of what he's aiming for. And actually, I think that's a very healthy thing, because I think in British politics, we had slightly become defeatist about how much, we can't do this because of the ECHR, we can't do this because it'll be JR'd, we can't do this because, Parliament won't allow us, the Daily Mail won't like it. I don't know what it is, but
there's always
a reason why you can't do something. And I think it had made us too timid, and we need to be bolder.
Do you think we should have some kind of replica of Doge?
Absolutely. I think that the state has become very bloated. In the very unlikely situation that we had won the election and I'd returned as Chancellor, and I was very realistic, I was not expecting us to win, but I would absolutely have wanted to do something like that, because you've got areas of the state where we have done things the way they've always been done for far too long. I think the welfare system is probably the example that's at the top of my list at the moment. And, I just say this at the moment, we're signing off 80,000 people a year saying you don't have to look for work.
Yeah.
And just under half of those are doing it primarily for mental health reasons. And I would say if you've got anxiety and depression, it's actually going to help your anxiety and depression if you leave the jobs market. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but everyone I've ever spoken to says that social contact is a very important way to improve your mental health. And we are reducing social contact by giving people an incentive to leave the jobs market.
Do you think we're signing too many people off on mental health sickness?
Yes, I do. I think we should be saying, if you've got a mental illness, we're going to make it better.
Yeah.
And being in work should be part of that solution.
And how would you look to construct a UK Doge? Like, does it need to be an outside force like Elon Musk to come in with fresh eyes and so on?
I think it can be very helpful to have someone who's got fresh eyes and got the confidence of having run their own business and knows how to tear up the rules and make things happen that everyone says is totally impossible. And, maybe we've got some people in this country who could do that. But does it have to be a separate agency? I don't know. That's one way of doing it. But as I think Doge is finding out, the problem is that people can fight back.
Yeah.
They could stop you accessing the key computer files. But, I had a plan to reduce the civil service down to pre-pandemic levels, which is about the same reduction that Elon Musk is trying to get in the US. And that was unfortunately canned by the incoming Labour government. I think it's a big mistake. And if they reflect on it, I think that many of them will probably agree with that, because it saved £4 billion a year, which is, a penny off national insurance. So quite a helpful thing to do.
What are your kind of reflections on the different cultures within departments? So if you take health, treasury and the foreign office, what are the different kind of cultures? I mean, treasury groupthink and treasury orthodoxy gets a lot of airtime, but what do the other three departments, treasury, health and the foreign office, have as a kind of cultural institutions?
I don't think there is a massively different culture in different civil service departments. I think most civil servants are really decent, really want to do the right thing for ministers. I never found that they were sort of Sir Humphrey-like, trying to manipulate you to do things you didn't want to do, as long as you were very clear about what you wanted. In fact, I found that they were, if anything, too deferential. You can imagine when I became Chancellor, I'd never been responsible for an economics ministry before. I had lots of ideas, but I really wanted, if I had a mad idea, I really wanted the civil servants to tell me. I didn't want them to sort of say, yes, Chancellor, well, very happy to do that. And I always asked my civil servants to call me Jeremy, because I said, look, I want you to feel you can really speak completely openly. And if I'm proposing something mad, I want you to tell me. That's your job. So was it different? The jobs were totally different for me.
Yeah.
The Department of Health was emotionally wrenching. You were dealing with life and death situations every day. You take a decision, you get it wrong, people might die as a result. That was tough. Foreign Office was definitely the most fun of all my government ministries. You had red carpet treatment, travel all over the world, and all the things that are going wrong in the world, they're not your fault. Yeah. So you're kind of like able to be a commentator without necessarily having to take responsibility. It's not like that when you're health secretary. And then as Chancellor, definitely less fun than Foreign Secretary, but a lot more power. You can change a lot more things when you've got control of the money.
More levers, yeah, exactly. What do you think the impact of AI will be on the jobs market?
I think it's very hard to call. There's two different views. So when Elon Musk came to the UK in December 23, I had a conversation with him about this, and his view is that AI is basically going to mean we don't need to work. And so when we do work, it's going to be like working as a hobby. It's going to be because we actually enjoy what it is we're doing in work, but we won't actually need to work because AI is going to take over all the things that we need to do, or most of them. So that's quite a bold view, but he is someone who knows about AI, and he is right in the middle of that. So you can't discount it, because this is someone who has got a very strong sense of the possibilities. Then the other view is that every other technological revolution we've had has saved time, increased productivity, but we just find other jobs to do instead. And it hasn't actually led. I mean, there are lots of people who thought that computers were going to lead to mass unemployment, and that hasn't happened. And I guess that most people probably are in that latter camp at the moment, because that's what's always happened in the past.
Yeah.
We're probably not thinking quite hard enough about what people who actually know about AI are saying.
Yeah.
Which is that it really could absolutely massively change things.
It's part of the point of this podcast, you see, because I don't think it really does get taken seriously enough, even if it's just an outside chance. You're talking about like fundamental change in our economic model, and you're talking about it within 2 or 3 electoral cycles as well, right? That is, really drastic. And there's lots done on climate change, etc., but there isn't much done on, what kind of like, even if it's a mega shift in employment rather than unemployment, what this kind of means for the job market. Although, it made me laugh what you were saying earlier about pick a growing market when you've got the world's richest man saying there will be no jobs of the future. I do slightly wonder about the name of the podcast, but anyway.
Yeah, I tell you, when I think about this, because my kids are 10, 12 and 14, so I'm sort of thinking, what jobs would I advise them to go for? And, when you've got AI happening, I probably would steer people away from accountancy.
Yeah.
I can see how computers are going to be able to do a huge amount of the work that's currently done by accountants. I don't think AI is going to replace surgery. And I think that even if AI has a huge impact on medicine, as I'm sure it is, we're still going to need doctors.
Yeah.
And so I don't think AI is going to mean we don't have an IT industry for obvious reasons. So there are certain markets where you think if you go into this market, you're pretty safe.
Yeah.
That there's still going to be people employed and in hot demand in those markets. But it does make you think about the world differently.
What have you used AI for?
I use ChatGPT every day. I use it because now I'm, not in the government, as well as representing my constituency, I'm writing. So I'm about to publish a book on Britain's role in the world, coming out in June, called Can We Be Great Again? And when you're doing research, ChatGPT is just so fantastic at telling you things like instantly. So, for example, what percent of our national debt is owed to foreigners? Well, for us, it's 28%. America, it's 9%. I was just interested to know how much of American business is actually owned by foreigners. I was interested to know, has America actually been bought up by foreigners?
Yeah.
It turns out it's like less than 3% of economic assets in the US. Now, ChatGPT isn't always right.
No,
but you can follow things through much more quickly. It would have taken hours and hours of research to dig out those numbers previously. So it's brilliant.
Well, let's go on to this Britain's place in the world, because one touch on your time as Foreign Secretary and just what you make of the kind of geopolitical situation now. Like, it's been changed so much with the kind of return of Trump, and of course you were Foreign Secretary whilst he was in his first run in the White House as well. What do you make of the state of geopolitics at the moment?
Well, I think it's obviously very unpredictable.
No.
And it's obviously very concerning because, when I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, we had the Soviet Union, and we didn't take the future of democracy for granted. We could see the Soviet Union trying to expand. And we were very conscious of the fact that we had to win the argument for open societies. And we're now back in the same thing. So we had a golden period after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 where we all thought democracies won. Francis Fukuyama even wrote a book called The End of History. And now we're back to where we were. And the only difference is that this time the opposition camp is led by China, which, unlike the Soviet Union, we are never going to bankrupt.
Yeah.
So we have an opponent that is very successful economically. So that is the worrying reality that, many people would have said the biggest threat to humanity this century is climate change. But I would say, freedom, open societies. If I said to you, what proportion of the planet live in fully free countries like we do? There's actually a think tank in America called Freedom House that monitors this. It's only 20% of the world. We are one of only 1 in 5 human beings that live in fully free countries. And so that's my first observation. And then my second observation is the biggest problem we have is that we've lost our self-confidence. So we, at the moment, are facing a global migration crisis. The number of people who officially classified as refugees has tripled in recent decades to more than the entire population of Australia. Those people are not trying to get into Russia and China.
Yeah.
They're trying to come to Europe and North America. And so our system is a better system. It's a more humane system. It's a more creative system. It's got lots of faults which we definitely need to sort out. But we mustn't lose our self-confidence. The reality is that if we believe in open societies, we need to figure out how we're going to win that argument.
How do we get more confidence then? And how do we make that argument?
Well, one of the things we need to do is, as we were talking about earlier, is to show that democratically elected governments can actually solve the big problems we face. I think we've just been talking about migration, so that's a good example, good place to start. So I'm married to an immigrant. I'm a big believer that welcoming the brightest and the best from all over the world is a positive thing for our country. But I also know that if we don't stop illegal migration, I'm not talking about reduce it, but actually stop it, we will lose the social consensus that says that Britain has benefited by being an open society and an open economy. People recognise the benefits of that, but they want to know that migration is controlled. And I think we've got into a state of learned helplessness about migration. We can absolutely, we might need to renegotiate the ECHR, we might need to leave it, we might need to renegotiate the 1951 Refugee Convention, but it's not like we're the only people facing this problem.
Yeah.
And we just need to get out there and solve the problem. And we absolutely can. It needs a lot of political will, but we need to do that. People need to see that, because the reason why we're getting these big swings and sometimes quite extreme parties getting, large numbers of votes in European countries is because people are fed up with politicians who aren't solving the big problems they face. So that's one thing that we need to do. And then the second thing we need to do is, show a bit more guts in standing up to Russia and China when they do things that, they shouldn't, and they try and undermine what happens in our societies.
Can you give us some examples of where we should stand up more? Show some
Yes, I think the most pressing thing we need to do is to invest more in defence, because in the end, hard power is very, very important. It's a backstop that you hope you're never going to need to use. But if we want to avoid a world war this century, remembering, as we always must, that there were 2 of them in the last century, then having proper armed forces, effective armed forces, is far more likely to deter a global conflict than being weak, because autocrats are opportunists, and if they think they're weak, if they think we're weak, they'll have a go. So that is a very big and pressing change.
Why do you think that the Conservative Party has become much more sceptical of China over the last 5 years or so? Because it's very interesting. If you look at your 20 years in Parliament, Chinese economy is barely in sort of the top 10, like when you arrived. Now it's sort of, one of the great powers of geopolitics, both economically and military. But why has the Conservative Party become so much more sceptical of it, do you think?
Well, I don't think it's just the Conservative Party. I think the whole of the West has, and that's parties of the left as well as the right. I mean, I think that Chrystia Freeland, who was, Foreign Minister of Canada when I was Chancellor, when I was Foreign Secretary, and then Finance Minister when I was Chancellor, so I got to know her very well. Well, she's from the Liberal Party, left-leaning, and she's incredibly hawkish on China because it's not us that have changed, it's China that's changed. China, since Xi Jinping became president, has taken away freedoms from people in Hong Kong. It's set up internment camps in Xinjiang. It's cracked down on dissidents at home, and it's interfering abroad in a way that it never did before. So when I, joined the cabinet in 2010, I think we hoped that China might become a giant Singapore.
Yeah.
We could live with the kind of lack of political freedom that they have in Singapore. It's, it's not something we would want for ourselves, but we can see that Singapore's been an immensely successful country, and we thought China was going to be the same kind of country, and I think it's clear that it isn't.
And how does your sort of, you mentioned there you're married to married to a Chinese immigrant. Like how does that sort of shape your worldview, as it were? Because you are quite different in terms of, late 80s, early 90s, going out to the Far East and Japan and so on. Like that wasn't sort of a usual kind of move. It's clearly always been an area that you're sort of interested in and have quite a globalist view. How have your views changed over the years?
Well, I love Asia. I really do. And, I love traveling there. But I always feel that when you go to other countries, you can learn from them.
Yeah.
But also you become a little bit prouder of the things that you do well. So, what I respect about Asia is, this is a big generalization, of course, but I would say overall they have a very strong work ethic and a very strong commitment to family. And I like those values. If you went the other direction to America, I love their can-do entrepreneurialism as well. I look at the UK and we're different, but we have incredible innovation in this country. We have very sophisticated political discourse compared to many countries. And we are the most open and tolerant country on the planet. And I really think that's a fantastic thing we've got going for us.
Coming back to the book and some of the work that you're clearly looking at and so on, is one of the angles that you're looking at has Britain taken too much investment from foreign powers, etc.?
Well, I do look at that because there's a whole chapter on trade, because of course Donald Trump has said tariffs the most beautiful word in the dictionary, and so I do look at that, and I think that my view is that the UK has always flourished by being one of the most open economies in the world, and attracting the brightest and best from all over the world, and I would like that to continue, but I think we have to do it with our eyes open, and we have to recognise that there are countries like China where if you have a technological dependency, if you depended on them for your communication systems, that could be used against us if there was any kind of geostrategic tensions. So we have to, unfortunately, be honest that there will be times when we need to avoid dependencies in trade, relationships, that maybe we wouldn't have thought was an issue a decade or so ago.
Do you think we need to become more self-reliant in lots of areas, not just defence, but also food and energy?
I think we should continue to be a great trading nation. I don't think we'd ever be able to produce everything ourselves. And I think we should make the argument that there should be no trade barriers between democracies. We're not going to go to war with each other.
Yeah.
And there will, I think, be increasing amounts of trade barriers with countries that are geostrategic rivals, but we should not be putting up barriers when it comes to trade between friends.
You've touched on the kind of like Donald Trump and how he's changing things. And it did make me think when we were talking about China and saying that Britain hasn't changed. Well, that's true, but America is changing rapidly. Like, what are your kind of reflections on dealing with the Trump White House? I know you're asked that a lot at the moment, but to give a kind of like specific example, towards the end of your time as Foreign Secretary, you had a situation where Iran took hold of an oil tanker and you decided to sort of designate that as a kind of like non-American issue. Like, what are your kind of reflections on dealing with the Trump White House and what should Labour do with it now?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is a phenomenal person, not to be underestimated. I found when I met him a number of times, he's very shrewd. He would look at everyone in the room, and I thought he wouldn't be interested in me because I was a mere foreign secretary. I thought he'd focus his attention on Theresa May, who was with me as Prime Minister. But no, he wanted to know, who's this guy? Do I go in high? Do I go in low? What's he want? What's his weak spot? And we actually got on pretty well, and we had some pretty good conversations. So I think he is very shrewd and very canny. He does have a different worldview to people like me. He's not interested in, as far as I can tell, in promoting American ideals in the way that his predecessors would have been. I think the way I look at it is that America is and will remain the world's most powerful democracy. We should always seek American leadership where we can get it on important global issues, but we shouldn't expect that we're always going to get it. And there are going to be times when other groups need to step up. They're clearly not going to be making big efforts on the climate change agenda, for example. And so I think it's up to other groups of countries. And I would say that, the UK should not underestimate our own influence. I think in all the big challenges facing the world, whether it's the future of democracy, security, free trade, climate change, human rights, migration, we are one of the top 10 most influential countries in the world, maybe one of the top 5 if you just look at democracies. So we're in a very good position to make things happen. And I don't think we should, be a church mouse if America's not stepping into that role.
What are the other kind of key focuses that the book is going to look at in terms of, can Britain be great again?
We also, and this is because I was obviously Chancellor as well as Foreign Secretary, we're looking, if we're going to have a global vacation, how can we afford it?
Yeah.
Because you can't just merrily say we should spend more on defence without explaining how you're going to spend, how you're going to pay for the extra money you want to put into defence or whatever it is. And what I find is the magic thread that links all these, things that could give us influence is our technology sector.
Yeah.
I think Israel's a really interesting example when it comes to tech. I remember Netanyahu once said to me that the reason the tech sector was so important for Israel is that other countries needed Israel more than Israel needed other countries. So if you want to be strong in the world, you need to be strong in tech. We've got an opportunity to be the world's next Silicon Valley, and we should really go for it headlong.
And what can we implement culturally wise to be more like Silicon Valley? Because there's levers the government can pull, but you come at this from kind of quite a unique perspective of having been an entrepreneur and Chancellor, which I don't think there's really been that many people who've done both of those things before. How can we have more of that kind of Silicon Valley mindset?
Well, I think a lot of it is about valuing the role of entrepreneurs in society. And, when I left Oxford, it was a great thing to do. And I think we need to continue to really send that signal to young people, particularly university graduates, that it's a fantastic thing to do if you possibly can. And so it was one of the most fun things I did. I also think we need to take a different attitude to risk taking. I mean, you tease me about, my Marmalade venture in Japan failing, but I think it's really important that we don't say that if you fail, you're a failure. And actually, we have a pretty good entrepreneurial culture in this country, but it isn't as good as America. And that's one of the great things we can learn from Americans.
Which UK entrepreneurs stand out to you? You'll have met lots in your role as Chancellor, etc.
Well, when I was setting up my business, the big idol was Richard Branson.
Yeah.
And he sort of seems to have retired now, as far as I can tell. But what I liked about him was that he just seemed to be having such fun. And I think that's a good approach, because when you're setting up a business, there's so much that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And you just need to make sure, you're having fun. Otherwise, you won't stick it out.
Do you think politics has become a bit too serious in some ways? Do you think that's part of the Trump appeal?
In a way, yes. I think, politics is very unforgiving to people when they make mistakes.
Yeah.
My most famous gaffe was when I called my Chinese wife Japanese. This became a big thing. And the Chinese foreign minister thought it was very funny. And there's a long story as to why I made the gaffe, which I won't go into. But he thought it was very funny. But there was an article on the BBC website saying this is as insulting to Chinese people as it would be to call an Israeli a Nazi. And, it's like a whole series of articles. I thought, God, this is just ridiculous, that people are getting so over the top about something that was just, an amusing gaffe, embarrassing gaffe, it has to be said from my point of view, but amusing one for many people. I think, politics has become a bit like that. Mm-hmm. You don't last very long as a cabinet minister if you make too many mistakes.
Yeah.
And so that, in the end, makes people quite cautious.
What have you learned about kind of resilience? Because there were quite a few times as a cabinet minister, whether it was over sort of the B-Sky bid, when you were culture secretary, but also as health secretary, you sort of were one of the most hated politicians in Britain at the time. How did you sort of ride those through? And what's your advice to politicians who find themselves in similar positions in the future?
Well, it's a good question. You need to know how to stay mentally resilient. It is really important. And in some ways, for me, like I said, in all the jobs I did, I was thinking, what am I going to change that's going to be remembered in 5 years' time? I wasn't judging myself by the next day's headlines. So in some ways, it made it easier. And I always said I only care about criticism when it comes from someone who actually knows me. Mm. If it comes from someone who doesn't like my blue rosette, well, I'll let that pass. But when I was health secretary, I was in the middle of a junior doctor strike, but the thing that I really cared about was patient safety and reducing the number of avoidable deaths. And actually the number of baby deaths went down by 19% during my period. I'll always be very proud of that. So I didn't judge myself by things that kind of are the typical things that go wrong for politicians. And that was, I suppose, quite an important part of it.
And how do you keep your mental health in check now?
I think running is really helpful. I go for a run in the morning. I go for a run at 6 o'clock in the morning. Even if it's dark in the middle of winter, I don't mind. I just go out there. I don't listen to music. I'm just completely lost for 45 minutes or so. And I think that really helps me. And also, I've got 3 gorgeous children and they keep me pretty occupied when I'm at home. So they're quite an important part of it as well.
And what would you like to do next? You have this, I think, sort of unique background of having been an entrepreneur, been a politician for 20 years, held some of the great offices of state. What do you want to do now?
Well, my first priority is I'd like to write some books, which are not memoirs.
Yeah.
but books that try to solve some of the big issues that we face, answer questions that are kind of on our mind. So Can We Be Great Again, the book that's coming out in June, was really written because when I was Foreign Secretary, you have got the nicest office in Whitehall. It's much nicer than the Prime Minister's office. It's like working in the reading room of the British Museum. It's beautiful, size of a tennis court. You kind of sit there and you think, how could anyone have this as their office? It's designed to impress foreigners. And I think every Foreign Secretary thinks after working in that office for a while, is this just an imperial delusion? Or are we actually a great country? And so I wanted to answer that question, having done the job.
Yeah.
And the next book I'm going to write is on the British economy. And I'm basically want to answer the question, is getting economic growth back a solvable problem? Because we've been agonizing about why it is that our growth rate's gone down so much. And I think it is a solvable problem, but I want to test that by writing an honest book that tries to answer that question.
And so what's going to be your approach with writing these books then? Like, you're obviously going into it with an open mind, but a question like that, you've obviously got a lot of thoughts and preconceptions on it. Like, how are you structuring it and your thinking on it, and how are you writing it?
Well, I've written a book already on the NHS called Zero, and I think the first thing is that what I don't want them to be is books where I just try and defend my record, because I think people get quite bored with that.
Yeah.
So what I want it to be is much more like knowing what I know now. This is what I got right. This is what I got wrong. And this is what I would do now going forward. This is what we should do now. And I find it very rewarding to do that.
One of the things, sort of reading and prepping for the interview, that I remembered of you is that you are a big Latin dancer. Would you be appearing on Strictly in the autumn?
I don't think so. I used to love Latin dancing, but I was very keen on a Brazilian dance called lambada, and I was single at the time, and I went along to these lambada classes, and there were like 3 guys and 17 ladies, and I thought, well, this is the place to be. But once I got married, life changes.
Yeah.
And so I've closed that chapter in my life.
What would be the job that you would like to do more than any other? If you could be the best in the world at something, what would it be?
Well, I always wanted to be Prime Minister, but I think that ambition has gone because I've seen close up 4 Prime Ministers, and it is the most miserable, difficult job you could ever imagine. The one that you could not say that job is fun.
Yeah.
It is really, really tough job to do. So I can't say, when I was asked to be Chancellor by Liz Truss, I was incredibly honoured, but I also thought this is going to be tough. It's like suddenly being told you've got to run a marathon. It's like, it's going to be tough. It's a privilege and an honour to do it. And so I don't think I have that ambition. But at the moment,
Did you think about saying no when you were offered?
I did. I asked Liz Truss for half an hour to think about it, and then I had a discussion with my wife, and my brother, and various people just to think it through. But then my dad was, quite a sort of, he was a naval officer and he had a sense of duty, and I thought, what would he have said? And he'd have definitely said, of course you've got to do it. So it didn't take long.
Why do you think? I'm curious about it. You say you've always wanted to be Prime Minister, but if you'd been asked before any of the leadership elections whether you wanted to be it, like every politician, you would have probably sort of tried to deflect the question. There's obviously a lot of new MPs in Parliament at the moment, and if they're all asked whether they want to be Prime Minister, most will probably try and deflect. And I think that kind of gets to the ambition point you were saying earlier, that why aren't politicians more openly ambitious about that?
I think you're right, actually. I probably wouldn't have said that, because I think that every new MP, when they're elected, there's a little corner of their heart they would quite like to be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And why not? I think it's much better to be open. I think it's just when you become older and more grizzled like me, and you see just how miserable it is, and its toughest, that you become a little bit more realistic about what these jobs actually involve.
Why do you think the job of Prime Minister is so miserable?
Because it's sort of set up to fail. We have one of the most sophisticated, smart media networks, media ecosystems in the world. Because we don't just have people who throw difficult questions at politicians. We have a whole layer of really smart journalists who put their articles in the broadsheets, who do in-depth interviews on radio. I mean, the current affairs program that sets the agenda in this country is the Today program, which is highly intelligent. Of course, some people don't like the BBC, but the truth is it sets the political agenda in this country. In most countries, it's breakfast TV that sets the agenda. And what that means is, because all those journalists, all those super smart people, think it's their job to be sceptical about the Prime Minister and to challenge, in the interest of democracy, to challenge the Prime Minister. That after a while, the country becomes sceptical about the Prime Minister as well, and maybe quite quickly. And so we end up with a system where our politicians always end up being discredited. And that is a very tough thing, but you need to be honest, that is the system we have.
You've said politics isn't as meritocratic as it could be. Is there any way of changing that?
I don't think so, because I think in a democratic system, a Prime Minister has to choose cabinet ministers. And they can't just choose it on the basis of ability. They have to choose it on the basis of who is going to be loyal to them. And they have to reward loyalty, because if you don't, no one will be loyal to you. And then they have to choose it on the basis as to who's a good media performer, not just who's good at running a big government department. So it has to be the way it is. But that means that if you go into politics, you need to understand that it's a much less steady career than it would be going into the police or working for the BBC or becoming a diplomat, where, if you work hard and you're smart, you can be confident of progression. In politics, there's a lot more luck involved.
What differences are there when you've looked to recruit in the private sector and growing a scaling business compared to recruiting special advisors, public service staff?
Well, recruiting special advisors is a slight exception, because they're the only jobs that you do actually do your own recruiting for. And that's quite similar to the private sector. You kind of choose the person you want, offer them the job, and they get it. But that you literally get, a handful of special advisors, that's it. You don't appoint anyone else in your government department. That's all taken care of by the permanent secretary. It's much easier in the private sector. If you like someone, you offer the job. If it doesn't work out, providing it's within the statutory period, you can say thanks but no thanks. In the civil service, if you don't like someone, you can't fire them. The most you could do is move them, and there's a lot more sort of political correctness in the processes. So that is harder.
Do you think Dominic Cummings has got a point about weirdos and misfits and trying to get them into government?
I think he does, in the sense that, we could do with some more contrary thinkers. I love the civil servants I work with, but they do fit a mould. And I think it's a good thing to have people who think out of the box more.
Brilliant. Jeremy, thanks very much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thank you, Jimmy. Pleasure.